The desert stretched in every direction, a vast sheet of scorched sand broken only by distant ridges that wavered in the midday haze. Captain Rachel Vega sat at the front of the formation, her F-16 humming steadily beneath her, the cockpit heat pressing against her through the Nomex suit. The canopy glass reflected the shimmer of contrails overhead, faint white threads that looked like scratches across a pale blue sky. She checked her HUD again, the faint green digits steady. Fuel already at mid-range, despite the mission only halfway through. Her breathing was calm, the rhythm, even under the hiss of oxygen feed. It was routine, at least on the surface. Radio chatter buzzed in her ears, light and careless, pilots joking about chow back at base or the dead air that filled their day. Someone laughed about the heat shimmer looking like a mirage. Then another voice said, "Vega's out front. What's new? Just keep her steady." They used her call sign without weight, like it was a nickname to pass around, not the marker of a point pilot. Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. She kept her eyes on the horizon where the desert blurred into the sky, and the faintest radar ping touched the edge of her screen before fading. Probably nothing, she thought, though her hand stayed lightly against the throttle, ready if it wasn't. Behind her, the patrol stretched thin. Only a handful of jets covered a wide arc, spread out more than doctrine would prefer. Command had pressed them to fill the space. No backup mentioned, no reinforcement promised. Static fuzzed through the comms when the ground controller spoke, his words breaking once, then again. Rachel repeated the call back, her voice level, but no response came. She frowned behind the mirrored visor, the reflection hiding her expression even from herself. Her visor showed only the glare of sunlit desert, a mask of calm. The hum of avionics carried steady through the cockpit, punctuated by the occasional beep of the system check. She leaned slightly to scan the gauges again. Nothing urgent, just habit. The altimeter ticked forward, steady climb to maintain spacing. Another pilot joked about contrails marking them like neon signs in the sky, easy targets if anyone cared to look. Rachel's gaze followed those trails, noting how they drifted with the high winds, already breaking into patterns. To her, they weren't only exhaust streaks. They were markers, faint sketches across the canvas of the sky. She filed that thought away without speaking it. Minutes stretched. The desert remained silent below, ridges unmoving, the heat rising in shimmering waves. The others leaned into casual chatter again, light voices cutting through the static. Rachel only checked her HUD once more. Fuel at midline. Comms weak. Command quiet, longer than it should be. She pressed her gloved hand gently against the stick. Steady. Professional. They thought she was only holding a routine line, but she had already marked the silence for what it was. Not normal. Not safe. She noticed what others overlooked. The first warning was faint, a blip at the edge of Rachel Vega's radar screen that grew into several at once. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing as the green pings multiplied far outside the expected approach vector. Before she could call it in, the sky lit up with alerts. Her HUD filled with pulsing icons, each one marking an enemy jet pushing in hard from different angles. The cockpit came alive with shrill tones. Multiple bogies. Multiple. Someone shouted over the radio. Voice jagged with disbelief. Another voice tried to issue orders, but the words broke into static, overlapping with a second officer giving contradictory directions. Command had fractured before the fight had even begun. The desert sky that had been calm minutes earlier exploded with contrails. White streaks clawed through the blue from every direction as enemy fighters cut across their thin patrol. Rachel steadied her breathing as the first missile alarms blared. A pilot screamed that he was locked. A second cried out before his transmission cut into a hollow burst of static. Out the corner of her eye, she saw a jet flare orange in the distance, breaking apart before spiraling downward. The others started shouting over one another, fragments of call signs and requests for orders colliding into a useless wall of noise. They were outnumbered, uncoordinated, and panicked. Rachel adjusted the throttle. A quick burst to draw attention from her wingman. She yanked the stick, slicing across a forming contrail line, then rolled to signal the closest pilot to follow. His hesitation showed even at a distance, the nose of his jet wavering, before he tucked in behind her. "Vega, what are you doing?" Another voice snapped through the comms. They set her call sign sharp, almost accusing, as if her movement was reckless. She ignored the tone. The HUD screamed another lock warning, bright red flashing across her visor. In the mirrored surface of her helmet, the chaos of missile trails and twisting aircraft reflected like fire caught in glass. She pulled hard into a climb, flares streaking from her jet in quick bursts, and felt the strain press her into the seat as a missile veered wide and detonated harmlessly in the upper air. The squadron was fracturing. Some pilots peeled away, desperate to survive, leaving gaps in the already thin patrol. Rachel saw it in the contrails they marked more than panic. They sketched a battlefield of openings the enemy would exploit. She steadied her breathing again, hard in rhythm with the engine, and used those streaks as her guide. She rolled wings twice, the signal crisp, then kicked the throttle to flash her afterburner in a deliberate pulse. Her wingman mirrored her, more confident this time. Another pair of pilots hesitated, voices rising in doubt, but the visual cues cut through the chaos in a way broken comms could not. They began shifting position, ragged but responsive. Missiles cut across the sky, smoke curling into white against the desert sun. Another Allied jet burst into fire, but this time Rachel had her wing tucked in behind hers, aligned with the vector she had chosen. "Vega's pulling us into something," one voice muttered over the comms. Suspicion, tangled with desperation. She gave no reply. She kept her movements sharp and visible, her jet the anchor point in the swirling mess. Command was gone, orders contradictory, radios jammed. But, in the patterns of contrails and the rhythm of her signals, a new order was beginning to take shape. She had made her first choice she would lead, whether they liked it or not. Rachel Vega steadied her breathing, drawing air in slow through the mask as the comms dissolved into nothing more than static and clipped words. The ground controller was gone. The squadron lead's voice cut off mid-command, and all that remained in her ears was the hiss of white noise layered with the warning tones of her HUD. It no longer mattered what anyone tried to say. Orders could not cut through the fog. So she stopped waiting for them. Her world became the canopy glass, the green glow of instruments and the wide desert sky fractured by smoke and contrails. The enemy pressed from every angle. Bright icons bloomed and multiplied on her radar, then merged into clutter as more poured into the battle space. She flicked a glance at the fuel gauge, already dipping lower than she wanted, then back to the sky where white contrails cut hard diagonals against the blue. At first glance they were chaos, but to her they became lines of terrain. The streaks showed where enemy jets had climbed, where allies had panicked, and where space still lay open. She read them as others read maps, charting a path through a battle that had lost its voice. Her gloved hand tilted the stick, rolling her wings sharply twice. It was a gesture old pilots had used long before radios became reliable, a language of movement written into the sky itself. Her closest wingman caught it and responded with a tilt of his own, slotting into a position just off her right shoulder. She pulsed her throttle once, a flash of exhaust that told him to hold close, then cut a flare to mark the next turn. The G-force pressed her back as she banked, muscles bracing, neck straining against the helmet's weight. The strain was familiar, a physical reminder that instinct and training were the only things holding them together. The others wavered, their voices still raised in doubt, but even through the haze of missile smoke they could see the order forming around her. Contrails arced above and behind them, curling into layered bands like the ridges of some invisible canyon. Rachel guided her small group through those ridges, using them as cover. She led them into a staggered defensive shape. Not perfect, but enough that they could overlap fields of fire and protect one another from being picked off. The formation steadied nerves. Doubt on the radio shifted into cautious surprise. Someone muttered, "Vega's pulling us into something," the name less sharp now, almost uncertain. Her visor reflected the mirrored world outside the calm horizon, the violent spirals of jets twisting and diving. The sudden flare of a missile cut wide. She allowed no trace of her own emotion to break through. Her pulse quickened only for a moment before she synced her breath with the thrum of the engine. Each inhale aligned with the vibration through the seat, each exhale with the steady ping of her HUD. Heartbeat and machine found rhythm together, a flow she had chased through training but never needed so badly as now. An enemy fighter cut across their path, nose angling to lock. Rachel kept her course steady, resisting the urge to peel away. She flicked her wing in a sharp roll, signaling the jet off her left to hold course. Then, with a sudden pull, she dove beneath the contrail shadow of another fighter, dragging the enemy into pursuit. The G's slammed into her chest, vision narrowing for a heartbeat, but she forced the jet through. Her wingman slid into position behind the pursuing fighter, perfectly aligned by her maneuver. A missile streaked out, white smoke curling as it tracked. The enemy broke too late. The explosion lit the sky ahead, shards scattering into the desert air. Her wingman's voice cracked with relief, one of the first coherent transmissions in minutes. The others, shaken but alive, tightened their arcs into the shape she had drawn from smoke and instinct. For the first time, the call sign Vega carried something different when spoken over the comms. Not mockery, not doubt, but the first spark of belief. She ignored the tone and kept her focus forward, eyes on the lines written above the desert. She would read them, and she would lead, because no one else could. The static swallowed the channel completely, a hiss that buried every attempt at direction from above. Rachel Vega tapped her radio switch twice out of habit, but the answer was the same hollow nothing. There was no one left to guide them. The desert sky, once wide and open, had become a cage closing from every direction. Radar clutter filled her HUD, hostile markers pushing in with mechanical precision. Fuel blinked lower, a quiet reminder of how thin their margin for survival had grown. Her cockpit echoed with layered alarms, one shrill tone overlapping the next as missile locks came faster than she could count. The squadron faltered. Some jets peeled away, breaking formation in desperation, their contrails cutting jagged scars across the sky. The enemy pressed the advantage, swarming with disciplined coordination. Rachel forced herself to stay calm, breath measured, syncing her inhale and exhale to the rumble of the engine. She scanned quickly, two still holding near her, one trailing behind, and others scattering farther away. The defensive shape she had built was unraveling. If she let them spiral apart, they would all be dead within minutes. A bright flare to her left caught her eye. An Allied F-16 twisted hard, flares bursting in panic, but the missile stayed locked. The detonation was brutal, orange fire ripping across the canopy glass. The jet buckled and spiraled downward, trailing black smoke until it vanished into the desert haze below. Rachel's hand clenched on the stick, glove creaking under the pressure. Her chest tightened, grief pressing sharp against her restraint. She forced the breath out slowly, refusing to let her body break rhythm. One heartbeat, then another. She could not stop for him. Not yet. Voices bled into the static, broken fragments of panic. Pull back, break left, anyone copy, then only crackling. Another shouted her call sign. Vega, what now? The tone was not mocking this time. It was raw, demanding, laced with fear that sought something solid to hold on to. She snapped her jet into a sharp bank, rolled twice, then flared deliberately. Her surviving wingman caught it and mirrored the maneuver. The others disoriented but watching, began to follow. They had no commander. She had just made herself one. Her visor caught the burning wreck below and the chaos above, reflecting both while hiding the flicker of pain in her eyes. To the others, she remained opaque, the mask of calm they needed to see. She pulled them into a tighter arc, staggered but coherent, giving them a shape to fight within. Her HUD blinked another low fuel warning, amber light pulsing steady against the reflection of contrails. She acknowledged it with a quick glance, then pushed it aside. The fuel would run out whether she worried or not. What mattered was giving them minutes more than they would otherwise have. "Stay on Vega," someone called, the words cutting through static with startling clarity. The shift was palpable. Her call sign had weight now, no longer a word tossed with doubt. It had become a point to rally on, an anchor in the storm. Her breath matched the hum of the jet, heartbeat thudding in time with the rhythm of alarms. She felt the pressure of every eye, every fragile line of trust resting on her lead. She let the grief flicker only in the curl of her hand on the stick, then buried it beneath resolve. Leadership had not been assigned to her, but it was hers all the same, because no one else remained. Rachel Vega held the formation together by force of will. What remained of the squadron was battered and thin, barely more than fragments of a once coherent patrol. Enemy numbers still pressed heavy on her radar, more icons than she could count without losing focus. Her HUD screamed with overlapping alarms, fuel ticking lower with every maneuver, weapon lock warnings strobing across her visor, yet her voice stayed silent. The language she had chosen was movement, not radio chatter. Her survivors followed because they had nothing else left to cling to. She pulled them wide, angling her jet so the contrails behind stretched into the illusion of a retreat. From above, it would look like the remnants of a routed force scattering across the desert sky. The enemy pressed harder, eager to finish the kill. Rachel steadied her breath and let them believe it. Her mirrored visor showed only reflection, the sunlit streaks of contrails, the smoke curls of missile burns, the scattered panic of a battlefield. Inside, her jaw was tight, grief and exhaustion flickering in the curl of her hand on the stick, but the visor hid it, as it always had. The afterburner roared as she pushed the throttle, leading the survivors into a shallow dive that kicked exhaust flames long across the horizon. Their jets cut down through the haze, trailing smoke and heat shimmer, the perfect image of panic. Her HUD showed the enemy splitting to chase, confident they had the numbers and the momentum. Fuel blinked amber again, a pulsing warning of how thin their time had grown. Rachel ignored it. Every second gained was a chance to redraw the map in her favor. When the contrails of her pursuers crossed above, she made her move. A sharp roll, wings flashing sunlight, then a sudden climb back through the layered white streaks. Her jet bucked under the G-force, pressing her chest flat against the seat, her breath tightening in the mask until it felt like iron. She forced her vision clear, synced her heartbeat to the hum of the engine, and pulled the formation with her. To an enemy chasing too hard, it would look like madness. To those still alive behind her, it was revelation. They bent with her, arcing upward into the contrail shadows, then slinging back around in a wide reverse pincer. The sky convulsed with shock. Enemy jets overshot, their contrails weaving past the empty space where her squadron no longer was. Rachel steadied her hands, HUD filling with flashing target boxes. Her visor caught the chaos, a mirrored sheet of fire trails and breaking formations, while her own eyes stayed calm. The first lock buzzed into her ears. She held steady, thumb pressing the release. The missile leapt free, white smoke curling in a bright spear. The hostile jet tried to brake, too slow, and fire bloomed against the horizon. Her wingman shouted in triumph, a raw note cutting through static, but Rachel had no time to feel it. Another enemy cut low, swinging behind the trailing survivor, lock warning screaming in her cockpit. She forced her jet into a high-risk dive, pushing through the contrail shadow so fast the turbulence rattled the airframe. her chest compressed, vision narrowing to gray at the edges, but she dragged the enemy into pursuit. She flared once, then twice, rolling sharp, and the hostile broke into her line. Her wingman had the shot. A missile roared past Rachel's canopy, locking true, and the explosion shredded the enemy before the kill could land on the man behind her. The battlefield spiraled into a maelstrom. Rachel's HUD lit with overlapping boxes, missile tones constant, radar beeps merging with the growl of the engine. Yet in the rhythm of machine and breath, she found flow, heartbeat, HUD, and engine, aligned in a cadence she had never reached before. She moved without hesitation, part of the sky itself. Another fighter cut across her nose. She fired again, and the jet tore apart in a burst of flame that scattered into the haze. 2 down. 1 saved. Momentum shifting. Voices came back over the comms, broken but sharper than before. They called her name without question. Vega. Lead. Stay with Vega. The word carried command now. No hint of dismissal. She gave no answer. She simply kept drawing the lines. Contrails bending into the shape of her vision. The desert sky becoming her map. The enemy pressed hard, but for the first time since the ambush began, the tide was not theirs. Rachel Vega had turned desperation into strategy, and, in her silence, the others followed. The desert sky burned with smoke and contrails, a canvas slashed with white arcs and black columns that twisted in the midday glare. Rachel Vega pushed her throttle to the stop, afterburners blazing, exhaust flames carving torches across the horizon. Her HUD pulsed in steady rhythm, fuel gauge near the bottom, alarms blinking but quieter now, as if even the machine knew the end of the fight was near. She inhaled through the mask, breath measured, and kept her eyes forward. The battlefield had become hers to finish. Enemy jets pressed for one last strike, diving through the haze in confident lines. But Rachel had shaped the sky into a map of her own design. Contrails layered into battle lines, smoke trails into boundaries, the shifting patterns of a fight she alone could read. She led her survivors through those corridors with surgical precision. No radio needed. Her visor reflected the burning desert and the fire-tracked air above. But her own face stayed hidden, calm behind the mirrored glass. To the others, she was only the jet that never wavered. She feinted another retreat, angling low toward the horizon, contrails of her wingmen fanning outward like fractured shards, the enemy committed to the chase, their formation tightening into pursuit. Rachel waited until the distance closed, until their exhausts burned hot in her mirrors. Then she pulled, hard and sudden, banking through the lingering smoke of an earlier kill. Her jet roared upward, body pressed into the seat as G-forces clawed at her chest. Her vision blurred at the edges, but her breath held steady, heartbeat locked to the engine's vibration. Her squadron bent with her, looping into the turn. The enemy overshot into the empty air, exposed in the contrail corridor she had drawn for them. Missiles streaked white against the blue. Rachel loosed her last with a steady thumb, the tone cutting through the hum in her headset. The hostile jet flared, twisted, then bloomed into fire that tumbled downward in a spiral of black smoke. Another broke under crossfire, the explosion scattering fragments that glinted like sparks in the sun. For a moment, the battlefield glowed with flame and fading trails. And then, the push collapsed. The enemy began to peel away, retreat lines carving back into the haze beyond radar. Their trap had broken, and the fight was no longer theirs. Silence crept in slowly. The alarms quieted, fuel still blinking low but steady. The endless missile tones replaced by nothing but the thrum of turbines. Rachel's cockpit felt heavy with the sound of her own breathing. She exhaled once, long and slow, the breath she had denied herself through the storm. Around her, the survivors pulled into line without words, jets steadying behind her as if the formation had always been natural. Someone said her call sign over the radio. Vega. Lead. But the word carried no question now. It was command, plain and certain. Contrails drifted above them, torn and fading in the sun, the final traces of battle hanging like ghost lines across the sky. The exhaust flames of her formation glowed faint against the horizon, torches guiding them home. Rachel glanced once at her visor's reflection. The burning haze, the fractured trails, the calm face hidden beneath glass, and tightened her hand on the stick. There was no triumph in the silence, only survival shaped into something stronger. She had not been chosen to lead, yet the sky had left her no choice. Now, with the desert spread beneath and the last echoes fading, the squadron flew behind her, alive because she had seen order where none existed. The base looked different when they came back, though nothing had changed in its walls or lights. The flight line that had once been alive with launches felt muted, as if the very air carried the weight of silence. Engines cooled, the heat shimmer fading into stillness. Mechanics moved slower, eyes lowered, their usual chatter gone. Rachel Vega guided her jet to its final stop and powered down, the hum of the avionics dying until only the creak of the cooling frame remained. She pulled off her helmet, the mirrored visor catching the overhead lights before she set it on the console beside her. Her breath came steady, though her chest carried the echo of strain that could not yet fade. The debrief room was half empty, the chairs left vacant telling their own story. No roll call was needed. The gaps marked who would never walk back through the door. The air was heavy with the shuffle of boots, the scrape of chairs, and the quiet hiss of air conditioning. Command spoke in clipped tones, avoiding any mention of failure or heroism. Their words stacked into neutral phrases that meant little and carried less. They asked for reports, then moved briskly on. The message was clear: what had happened would not be written in praise or shame. It would simply be absorbed into silence. Her fellow pilots, those who had returned, moved differently around her now. There was no applause, no ceremony, just a shift in how they spoke her call sign. One voice said Vega softly, as though the word itself carried weight. Another reached across and pressed a hand once against her shoulder before moving on. Her wingman lingered, nodded once, and whispered thanks, too quiet for command to hear. The gestures were small, restrained, but each one settled deeper than any official medal could. Rachel took her seat at the end of the table, opened the after-action report, and began to write. Her notes were precise, stripped of emotion. Every maneuver listed in clean detail. She filed fuel states, enemy numbers, missile counts, losses confirmed. Her handwriting stayed even, her sentences direct. She did not linger on what could not be changed. Her calm precision was its own act of respect, honoring those who had followed her through fire by refusing to let their last moments become chaos on paper. Around her, the room rustled with the same task, though more slowly, hands trembling where hers stayed steady. When the debrief ended, people stood quietly. No one raised their voice, no one argued. They left in subdued lines, each step softened by the gravity of absence. Rachel gathered her helmet and carried it to the hangar. The wide space hummed with fluorescent light, echoes bouncing off steel walls. She set the visor down on a table near the exit, its mirrored surface catching the glow of the ceiling lamps. The reflection showed only light and empty air, a quiet monument to the fight that had burned itself out above the desert sky.